Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at our session today, Teaching Oracy through Authentic Classroom Talk Tasks. I'm Becky, I'm the Chief Exec of the English Association, and I'm really pleased to be here with you today. The EA is a learned society and a subject association which was founded in 1906 to promote, support, and celebrate the discipline of English studies. We cover all stages of education, from primary and early years through secondary and further education to higher education and beyond, and we cover all parts of the discipline across language, linguistics, literature, and creative writing. Events like this one are made possible by the fantastic contribution of our volunteer speakers. So thank you ever so much to Lauren for being so generous with your time and expertise. And Lauren will introduce herself properly in a moment. Our members also make it possible to keep these events free and open to all by paying their membership fees. So if you would like to contribute to the national conversation about English and help support our discipline, please do consider joining us. Membership starts at just £29 and enables you to support our events and campaigning work for a whole year, and you get access to a range of member benefits, including online access to all of our journals. Okay, enough from me. Now it's my pleasure to hand over to Lauren. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. So I'm Lauren from the English Speaking Board. At the English Speaking Board, my role is as our Senior Product Developer and Senior Assessor for Oracy. And so all of my work really is around Oracy and the teaching of Oracy and the assessing of Oracy. And so that is why I'm sort of here to talk to you today. So I'm going to just share my presentation with you and then we'll get started. So hopefully I do it right. Ooh, here we go. Okie dokie, here we go. So there's a few questions up there just to be thinking about whilst I start and introduce, which are just for you. And I know some of you have already thought about this because I've seen your responses to the questions before you joined. And those questions that I've got are really, when do learners speak most meaningfully in your settings? What makes some classroom talks feel authentic? And when does talk become procedural? Rather than authentic. So I'm just going to start with a bit of an introduction to the whole theme. We know there's a growing national focus on oracy at the moment. I can see it through your responses and for the reasons that you're here, and also following the curriculum and assessment review, the revised Ofsted framework, the wonderful work done last year by the Oracy Education Commission. So we've seen increasingly and heard increasingly that we should be putting spoken language alongside reading and writing as a core part of the curriculum. But we think there's still a bit of a gap, as was highlighted by the recent Ofsted English subject report, showing that often spoken language is viewed as a teaching strategy rather than an object to be studied in itself. And the Education Commission also talked about how many teachers still sort of lack clear tools for assessing progression in oracy and for explicitly developing those spoken language skills. So what I want to think about today is sort of what happens when we treat communication itself as something worthy of explicit teaching and reflection, but also how to make sure the tasks that we're given to learners to do that work is authentic and meaningful rather than performative, so that the communications we ask them to undertake have tangible outcomes and that really sort of harness the knowledge and passion that we know our learners have and have to share with us. So that's the general thrust of today's session. So, oh, hello, there we go. Just made that. So before I get into some examples, I want to reflect a bit on this sort of idea of classroom talk and what it means to be authentic. I think a lot of us, I've just realised because I'm sharing my screen, I can't see the responses. So if there are any, feel free to share them out at me. Okay. So those questions. But just be thinking about it if not. I think a lot of us in the classroom see those situations where learners become very good at doing classroom talk without necessarily experiencing any meaningful communication or really actually genuinely, authentically communicating with each other. So for example, we might do partner talk because the structure says turn and talk. And then you might use sentence stems, which is great. And we're not against that. We use them in our teaching resources at ESB, and they can be really valuable. But the issues arise when it's the structure that becomes the purpose for the talk rather than the purpose of being supported by structure. And so we hear it when they talk because there's no authenticity, because they're only thinking about meeting those structures and not on what they are actually saying and what they actually mean. So what ends up happening, I think, is that sometimes learners become performers of classroom discussion rather than communicators of knowledge. And they have all that knowledge. They have so much knowledge already that they can communicate. If we look at the work of Neil Mercer, if anyone hasn't read his new book yet, it's really good, and I would suggest it. So his work around exploratory talk, talks about how high quality classroom discussion isn't just about participation, it's about learners thinking together. We see the same with Robin Alexander, talking about dialogic talk being purposeful and reciprocal and cumulative. If we go right back to Vygotsky, we think about how our learning develops through social interaction and a shared language. That shared language isn't, we can't get there through a construct that's been imposed externally on learners. I think we need them to create it between themselves and us as teachers with our learners, but those learners with themselves as well. So what we really want is to be able to design tasks that it's not just that there's more of them involved and talking to each other to make that classroom talk good, but that they are co-constructing meaning together, and that meaning is and that learning is driven by them rather than by the task. So what do we mean then? What makes communication meaningful, or what makes a communication task meaningful? So I think there's 4 elements to this. The first one is purpose. Why are they communicating? Is it just because they've been told to, or is there a deeper purpose? Who are they communicating for? Who is their audience? Increasing importance, what is the outcome? So in my mind, I think what depends on that successful communication. Is there anything that is going to happen as a result of them communicating successfully? And lastly, and what I think most importantly, agency. So do those learners have a genuine choice and influence and investment in the task? I think so often one of the difficulties with classroom speaking tasks, and I know I was guilty of this as a teacher when I was teaching, was that we give them a topic, say, to talk about, do a presentation about Shakespeare, and they don't care about Shakespeare. They might by the end of it, who knows? If we've done our job well, maybe they might, but chances are it's not what gets them up in the morning. They're not getting out of bed raring to learn about Shakespeare. But what does get them going might be their football team, or might be, something that they do with their parents at the weekend, or a holiday they've been on that meant a lot to them. And those are things they can talk about that they are invested in. Even more so, if we're asking them to co-construct together, can we give them opportunities to do tasks where there is a genuine outcome and change that they can see, that they can influence something that gives their voice more meaning? And then, not to add even more spanners to the works, but then also, like, what opportunities does that then give us to explicitly teach the oracy skills that they need to succeed? So there's these 2 different things, I think, in my head: the task itself, and then the underlying skills that they need to complete the task. So the task needs to have that agency and a clear outcome. But underneath that, we can teach them explicit skills to succeed. And that might be different for each learner, and it might be different for each task. So if they then have that genuine care about what they're communicating, I think their communication choices then matter more. So not only do they matter more as well, but they're then easier to grasp as a concept. So suddenly the structure of what they're saying matters more, the tone they use matters more, how clear they are, it all matters more because they have a genuine investment in the outcome. So we're not like abandoning the idea of performance and presentation entirely, but we're just trying to ensure that they have a genuine purpose. Um, I think it was the National Literacy Trust last year published their paper on oracy and said that it's not just an educational activity, it's a social and cultural one as well. So how can we build that in to the tasks that we are asking our young people to do? And I have some ideas, so I'm going to share them with you. So these are some examples. I can see, are you okay? I thought you were going to say something. Are we good? Okay, sorry. So I've got a few examples that are taken from some new resources that are coming from ESB in about September. So watch this space. But these are some suggestions for tasks that you can use in the classroom with primary learners or secondary. If you're here from secondary, feel free to use them too. And to give them some investment in their talk. So the first example that I've chosen from a wider set of teaching resources is the idea of an expert help station or an advice shop. So the authentic purpose here is that they are actually helping a person to solve a problem. So importantly, and something that we talk about a lot at ESB, is that in this activity we get to position the learner as the expert in the room. So allowing them to be the person with the most knowledge about whatever the topic is, and that's a thread that runs through our assessment design sort of consistently. So we asked them to have a real problem. So they think about, could be helping a new pupil to the school understand the routines of the classroom. It could be explaining how to organise the equipment, helping someone to prepare for an event, help to learn a new game, or whatever it is that they happen to be really good at. And the best way that we would hope this would happen would be if your learners came up with the problems, if there are problems that do exist within their classroom, within their school community, within, you could do this any way you want. So like a wider experience, if it could be, you could invite parents in, whatever it is, if they have problems they can solve for them. So the learner isn't speaking because the teacher has told them to speak. They are speaking in order to solve a problem for somebody else. And that gives with it some sets of communication demands. So they need to be able to sequence information to be able to give instructions. So they need to be able to use like those underlying systems of first you do this, and then you do this, and then you should do this, and finally, blah, blah, blah. So those stems are still built in. They need to be able to clarify. They need to be able to check that people understand, adapt their explanations if they don't. And like a key to all of these is that they're all real communication experiences. So rather than a role play, preferably somebody has a genuine, authentic problem and they are positioned to give the advice. Now, obviously, that's not always possible, but in the ideal world. So even more so, the person who is speaking is best qualified to give that help. So like that learner is the one who has the knowledge. So it's even better if it's something that learner is already really good at. And obviously, the more you know your learners, the easier that becomes. So as that happens, those communication choices become more meaningful. So the learners start to adapt, begin to think about sequencing, all those wonderful skills. And that gives us some explicit teaching opportunities as well. So we can deliberately teach that sequencing language. But we can also teach things like pace and pause and emphasis and audience awareness and check-in understanding. So you can have complementary sessions or teaching that goes along with this. That can be things like allowing those learners to gain this set of tools and especially the vocabulary to go with it to describe these skills. So if they're practicing this sort of language, to be able to say to each other, that bit was a bit fast, I didn't catch it, could you slow down your pace? Giving them some modeling and examples where you emphasize particular words so that they can see how that sounds and see where, that's the most important bit. So you can do that with the sequencing activities as well. Like, oh, well, if it's the first most important thing, what word are you going to emphasize in this instruction? And then instead of simply saying, that was good, then those learners can start to say things like, that pause helped me understand. I wasn't sure what to do after step two. Maybe we can talk about how to make that clearer before they go off and do it for real. Um, we had this feedback from a centre that we did a research piece with last year, when it was actually when they were talking about reading aloud and they used some of our resources to teach reading aloud. And they said that, what they often do as teachers is say to the learners, oh, you have to be more fluent. And the learners would be like, okay, what does that mean? But then once they'd had all these sessions and they'd done the underlying skills, then they then had that ability to say, you need to try and change your tone when the character is speaking. You need to try and slow down so that everyone can understand. When there's a full stop, you need to pause. So they had that, that they were able to reflect more meaningfully on that sort of communication. That's a bit of an aside. So this is our first task. Our second is an interview with a member of your community. So this could involve a librarian, a caretaker, a school cook, a grandparent, somebody at the sports club, somebody who they are in a gaming community with, an online community, obviously depending on the age of your child or your cohort. So the idea of this is finding out meaningful information from a real person. And I think this is the sort of task that often falls into a role play situation, where we say to the learner, you are a librarian. This person is going to interview you and ask about your job, but they're not really a librarian. So there's only a certain amount of response that can be given. And so the depth and the natural conversation doesn't flow. But this is a really good activity for teaching active listening and questioning and adapting responses and building on answers, because that's the communication demands. So our young people are going out and speaking to somebody with the intention, in the full task, the intention is they go and interview somebody and then they come back and then they share that information with the class. So they share what they have learned about this person within their community who helps in whatever way they do. But the actual interview is the core skill, because they have to be able to learn to actively listen, and we have an awful lot of resources about that, with too many for me to talk about now. But I'm happy to field some questions about it if anyone has them. But for example, it's things like even just explicitly teaching how to show that we are listening, so that we nod when we hear something good, or also what it is like to not be listened to. So there's activities that we have where it's fun for them because they get to be a little bit naughty. And they sort of are given cards that says like, oh, look out of the window when someone is speaking to you, or yawn aggressively, instead of paying attention. But when it's flipped around on them, they then have to feel how that feels to have somebody not pay attention to them. And that sort of that empathy in that real life communication experience is enlightening. I think like, oh yeah, that wasn't very nice actually. I didn't like not being listened to. But there are lots of other activities to do to improve that active listening. And then I saw this crop up in the responses, and something that we're very keen on addressing through our assessments and through our teaching resources is that idea that like a lot of the time I think young people especially they're just waiting for their turn. And so when they're asking a question, it's not necessarily because they are interested in the response, it's because they're interested in taking their turn. And so there are a lot of teaching resources around how to do good turn taking, and that is important for this activity as well. But it is also about how to build questions or how to ask questions that actively seek further information. So how do you listen to somebody speaking to you and then pick something out from that information and ask a further question? So that is the skill that this activity enables. So we can explicitly teach those listening behaviors and the conversational flow or turn taking, but also the idea of a follow-up question. So if they are asking, and all of this is made more possible because of the realistic, authentic communication experience, because when they are actually faced with a real member of the community, it is much more difficult to ignore them. or to be less interested, because chances are they might be less interested in what their peer has to say than they might actually gain some interesting information, especially if they've chosen the person they want to speak to. So rather than being given a person to go and find out more about, if you say to them, who is an important person in your life or community, and what can you find out about them that we might not know? What stories do they have? Like, and they're good prompts as well to give, like, can you find out one interesting story from their job? Can you find out, see if they can seek out this information, and then encourage them to go on those tangents of, well, why was that? And also teaching what those questions are. So the explicit teaching of those follow-up questions. So because a lot of oracy, I think, is built on assumption. Like we assume that they will know how to do things because it's general knowledge, or because we assume that progression happens by osmosis. I think in oracy, like if they are exposed to good questioning, they will learn how to do it themselves. But I think if we explicitly teach it, it can only help rather than hinder. So there's things like little question cards you can give them to in case they need them. So things like if they're asking a question of who should we think of? I seem to think of librarian, probably because I know lots of them. They might ask them, what's the most interesting book that anyone's ever asked you to find for them? And that might be a question that they've pre-planned to ask, which is fine. But then when they get the response, it's, well, how do I find out even more? Like, what's another question I can ask to get more information? And if they can have a, a pre-selected sort of set of prompts, like, is there a question I can ask about where that happened? Is there a question I can ask about how that came to be? Is there a question I can ask about the person that they've just described? So learning how to build those additional questions for them to be able to give feedback. There is still, always the risk of them not being interested. And that is always the main risk, I think, in any oracy work is the main stumbling block for good listening is being disinterested, I think. And so that's why it's so important to try and give them the opportunity to make the choice themselves so that they are already invested in the talk that they are doing. And then hopefully through that, obviously over time it builds that you just develop those skills anyway and get good at good active listening when you are disinterested, perhaps. Hopefully not happening now. We'll see. Never, I can't see you, so I wouldn't know. Yes, so this has the bonus of helping the learners themselves to begin to notice whether the questions are helping the conversation continue. Is somebody building on the responses, or are they just asking, lots of closed questions that aren't allowing additional information? Explicitly teach what an open question is and how to turn a closed question into an open question. Is active listening visible? Can they see the other person that they are speaking to in this external environment, listening to them or not? There's something very powerful, I think, for a young person about being listened to by somebody who they don't know, or who is older than them or in a position of authority. I know some of you said in your responses that a lot of your young people are like afraid to speak to people they don't, in front of people they don't know. But I think that's quite different to speaking with somebody they don't know. So that's an easier stumbling block to get over, I think. But in either case, the communication becomes something that those learners can shape and improve with each other. I've got one more example, which is a little bit different, and one that might be more familiar in terms of like a performative task. And that is to deliver a persuasive argument. I think we've done this a lot in English, especially. It's a sort of core part of the subject. So this sort of does focus on older primary learners potentially because there's like a higher cognitive load. But I think it's a really useful example because it shows hopefully how to turn something that is potentially quite performative into something hopefully authentic. So it could very easily be come and stand at the front and give a speech that you have written on paper. That would, and then you stand and you read it out. And that can very quickly become quite performative, especially if they are given a generic topic. If the teacher is the only audience, or the teacher in their class, or if we teach persuasive techniques to be used quite mechanically, rather than thinking about rhetoric in an oracy sense. So once I'm going to start sounding like a broken record because that's sort of idea here. Them choosing the issue that genuinely matters to them is the thing that makes the difference. So and that can be, these little images here are supposed to symbolize, these come from our teaching resources. Is it a local issue? Is it a national issue? Is it a global issue? So asking them to think about where they are now and their wider community, possibly the whole world if they have, nice big ideas. And they can choose issues that genuinely really matter to them. So could it be um, improving the spaces around the school, reducing food waste um, at in school at lunchtime? Is there a school rule they would like to change? On in a wider sense, do they want to change something about the world? Which they want to speak about in a way that genuinely matters to them. And that creates sort of the richest opportunities for them to use their voice and to be listened to, but also for explicit teaching. So this is a slightly higher communication demand. We're talking about trying to persuade, audience awareness again, be able to justify their ideas and their opinions and to be able to adapt what they are saying to who they are saying it to. Um, and those explicit teaching opportunities really for pace and pause and emphasis and how to use our voice to create meaning. Another thing that I think we assume will happen, but doesn't necessarily unless we explicitly teach it. So we spend a lot of time as teachers teaching young people how to craft their writing, especially in this sort of sense, when we're doing this sort of task with persuasive work. We don't spend a lot of time teaching them how to craft their voice and to craft how they actually speak the message. So I know it used to happen to me. I was a secondary teacher, but I'd ask them to write a persuasive piece of writing, and I'd be like, "Gosh, that's an amazing piece of writing. Come and read it to everybody." And then they'd read it, and it would not sound persuasive at all, even though I know on paper it was very. And when I read it in my head, it sounded very persuasive, but when they read it aloud, it loses all the nuance and the meaning because they don't know where to place the emphasis, they don't know where to place the pause to create impact. And so these are all the things we can start to explicitly teach. I do have some examples of teaching resources to show you for this one, you'll be happy to know. So because the others I'm just like, yeah, it's there. Good luck. But this one we do, I do have someone on here to show you. But it again is the agency that changes the communication. So just we know from other research we did. I think I sent it as a part of the reading, but it is very long. It was our impact report from a few years ago. We did some research within that about learner agency and confidence. And a lot of we asked learners before they took our assessments or before they did their preparation for the assessments what they were concerned about. And the majority of them were worried about things that you identified in the list that got sent to us. Things like not knowing what they're talking about, not being believed, afraid of speaking in front of people they don't know, afraid of not being taken seriously. And it was all of it boils down to knowledge, really, is that actually and this is what came out in the questionnaires that we gave out after the assessment, was they were like, actually, because they got to talk about something that they were really passionate about already, a lot of those fears were lessened because they didn't have to think about the content of what they were talking about. They didn't have to be concerned about the content because they knew the content so well because it was something that they love. And so that is the sort of core of this task, is get them to speak about something that they already are really passionate about, even if that is something that you don't think is like academically viable, is quite important. So even if what they are really concerned about is the new patch on Minecraft that has made it unplayable, like, that's okay, you go for it. You tell us about why that is a problem and why it needs to change, and make sure that you use all of these skills. And who knows, they might persuade you. Um, hmm, possible. So I've got a couple of example resources. How am I doing for time? Oh, good, perfect. About right. And so again, it's just this idea of making the task relevant to the learners. So first get them to think about actually when do we use persuasion in general in life, but then even more specifically is when do they use it already? So I think it's really important always when we're teaching oracy skills to get the learners to reflect on what they already know that they might not realize that they know. Because I bet the skills that they have and that they use and that they don't realize it. And it's things like, have they tried to persuade their parents to let them get a pet or get a piercing or go to a party, especially as they get older? Get a new phone, get new technology, be allowed to play an online game with their friends. Is there a specific holiday they went to go on? And then we ask them to think like, how did you accomplish that? What techniques did you use to try to persuade your parents? Because I bet it wasn't a list of three. I bet it was flattery, bribery, emotional manipulation, all of these things that we have names for in English, in the subject of English, but that they won't realize that they have names for. They will have used them. They'll have used repetition a lot, I bet, probably by going, please, 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 please. But then we can teach them, obviously this is for our older learners. We can start to teach them those cornerstones of how to persuade. And I think it's never too young to teach Aristotle. So we can still teach them that we have to sound credible and we have to be emotive and we have to appeal to logic. And these are the three things that will make people believe us and that they are more likely to be able to do. And they can apply this to anything they want to persuade anybody about. So I'm not going to go through it all, obviously, because it'd take forever, but it's there. And here are all the sort of core underlying skills that attach to that. So, if we're trying to sound credible, yes, we want facts and expert opinions and a good counter argument for when your parents say, no, you can't have a pet because this, and you go, but have you thought about? And so those skills can still be taught even to our younger learners, I think, as long as it is something meaningful to them. And maybe it is that they want a dog. Who knows? Maybe that's their argument. A lot of parents might not be too pleased if you do that. But you never know. So this is like my last sort of point really, is that one of those challenges in oracy is the progression as well. So like where do we start and where do we end? Like we've just got to our last bit here about like persuading and justifying and negotiating those like highest of oracy skills, but it starts down here with being able to share, being able to retell and be able to explain. And so we've got a bit of a progression framework, obviously, as an assessment a whole framework of assessment, so that sort of helps us to come up with a framework for progression. But it's in this case, and for you guys, I would like to sell it as learning communicative flexibility. So those learners being able to start with that sharing and retelling and then build to instruct and collaborate and problem solve until they can negotiate and lead. And so those underlying skills, think, how can I give them authentic opportunities to do those things? And by authentic, I mean both real world and realistic, but also something I haven't touched on that I should have more, that they get to use their authentic voice as well. So we're not teaching them to be someone that they are not. And that hopefully also comes through with this meaningful choice that they make, is that because they're already speaking about something that they really care about, chances are they'll use their most authentic selves to talk about it. So, yes, we want them to use an appropriate register. No, we don't want them to change their accent to be able to, we don't want that. Yes, we want them to slow down enough to be understood. Often an issue in our neck of the woods up here, up in Liverpool, but often very fast. So, useful to tell people to slow down every now and then, but not to change who they are as people. And so that comes along with that authenticity. Anything else? No, I think I'm gonna wrap it up because I know we've got questions. So there are some final reflection questions for all of you, which I know you'll answer in your own due time. So yes, I just want to leave you with the thought of what meaningful reasons do your learners have to communicate in your classroom right now? Are they purposeful? Are they authentic? Are they agentic? And are they not simply just a preparation for writing something? Do they have a purpose beyond that? Yeah, that's it really. So I shall Oh, sorry, I've just talked to you for a solid 30 minutes. And there we go. Oh,
Thank you
I'm
so
still sharing my
much.
screen.
You are,
Oh, thank
yes.
you. I've lost you. Hold on.
Two lovely birds.
They are lovely birds. I'm glad there was, that's all that is in fact there. How do I stop sharing? Oh my gosh. I never use Zoom, sorry.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I've
And you
taken
can tell me when I can work out how to make it stop. Oh, there it is. Okay. There you go. Sorry.
No, no, thank you. Folks, if you have any questions for Lauren, this is your chance. So do pop them in the chat. I noticed, Lauren, while you were speaking, that Rachel noted that your thoughts on interviewing skills really resonate with Rachel's experience in running the journalism club. And you made
Oh,
Rachel think
nice.
about the distinct skills needed to interview well, which is a really interesting point to make because you broke down quite a lot of granularity the individual skills.
Yeah, it's something that we break down even more so, obviously, in our actual wider set of materials. But yeah, um, I can see about the GCSE spoken language. What's it called? What's the E stand for again? It's been so long. Um, Performativity. Yeah.
Yeah, so Rebecca's noting that the idea of embedding the teaching of voice is something really important.
Yeah,
And Rebecca does a
it
bit
does.
about the performativity of the SLE, but not the intention behind it.
Yeah, I think it's something that, and a lot of it is about time. Like when do we have the time in the, especially in the secondary curriculum? It's already so jam-packed full that the SLE often becomes a bit of a tag on at the end. But I think that's where there's an opportunity at Key Stage 3, to really start to embed those skills as we go through. And again, I know there's a lot of great talk that happens already in schools, but I think a lot of the talk that happens in schools is learning through talk rather than that learning to talk or about talk, which is where these things come in.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. So Carly asks, are there particular strategies you think would be most useful for older learners, 16 plus resitting GCSE English? What a brilliant question. I'm always glad to be able to talk about, what our colleagues in FE might need.
Us too. We are. We've always been really proud actually that we don't leave FE out of our conversation at ESB, and we've got an offer for them. But in terms of resitting GCSE English especially, oh, what a question. I would suggest actually looking at reading aloud in terms of meaning and creating meaning with the voice, because often I think it can give a better understanding of the way a text is written than just looking at the language from like a writer's perspective. So when you start to think about how does this sound when it's aloud and why should it sound that way, then we start to get a little bit more into what the intention was. We can look at it from the other side of the text, basically. Can you look at it the opposite way around? That is unfortunately nothing that I've mentioned here today, but we do have a lot of stuff on it, and I'd be really happy to, answer that in more depth externally if needed. But I think that's a good way to approach GCSE texts in particular, and possibly also answering that other question about exploratory talk um, with opinions on a text. That might also be another way to look at that.
Yeah, yeah, thank you, Lauren. Yeah, so Rachel's also asked a question about ideas to encourage exploratory talk when asking for student opinions on a text and struggling to
Mm,
get students to share emerging ideas rather than solid knowledge, that kind of learning through talk that we just mentioned. Yeah.
yeah. Oh my gosh, I've just really conveniently got. I think I'm up on my laptop, so it's going to restart in 5 minutes. I can't just do that
All
anymore.
right, we'll be done
Yeah,
before
we'll be
then.
done by then. That's fine.
Yeah, right, let's see if we can
Let me
squeeze
just
another
think
one
about
in.
this one. So that idea of emerging ideas, I think that again comes down to that fear of being wrong, doesn't it? Like that idea that they're afraid to say what they think in case it's wrong. But um, ideas on a struggle sketching is share emerging ideas rather than solid knowledge. That's a really interesting one that I'm trying to think of a good answer to. I think it's again maybe that idea of getting them to learn how to build on each other's ideas, so that if they can start with even the most basic of idea, like then they can help each other build on it. So we've got a resource that we created recently, which again will be available on the website hopefully in September, about like the building blocks sort of talk in terms of exploratory talk. So thinking about like how to connect each other's ideas and how to ask a question to build something else, or is there something you can say to move that idea forward? And it is basically like some sentence stems, but with that in mind, so that might be one way to do it. So, if you give them, yeah, it is a slightly gamified task. So it depends how old your learners are and like how appropriate that is to them. But literally they have to earn the next block. So they have to use the STEM or the sort of skill to be able to earn the next block to add to their construction. So it's all based on Lego, um, which or other building blocks are available, I guess. But they have to start with the base plate, which is sort of like where they start building their idea, and then can they add to that through these different um, types of communication until they can build a structure, and the structure is their finally formed idea, I guess. So that there's a game you can use to build those skills.
Thank you. That was a really interesting response to that. And I wonder if there's also something in there about the teacher being able to model
Yeah,
building ideas and not just them always knowing what to do or say.
yeah, definitely. Yeah. Perhaps a really good idea to get them to ask you questions that they think you won't know the answer to. Like just get them to pick the topic just as a way to model the thought process rather than to talk about literature in this case or the text, but just like what do you know about that I know nothing about? Ask me a question about it and I can model aloud how I think through those ideas, but also like externalize it. Even better if you can get like a group of teachers to do it. Oh, amazing. Get a group of adults and get the kids to give you a task and watch you build ideas. Because they might not have seen it before. They might not have seen it successfully happen. So it's quite hard to model a conversation without peers at the same level. So as much as you can try to model as a teacher, unless you've got, a couple of teaching assistants to help you with that modeling, or other adults in the room, it can be quite difficult to do it with, especially if your learner's very young, because they might, you need somebody who already knows how to do it. So that's an idea.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And I think probably the last comment to kind of end for us today was from Rebecca, who was saying that they really like the idea of using retelling to work in something about developing recall and
Mm,
active listening, and that a room of active participants that are engaging with the subjects they're listening to has got to beat passivity. And that exactly where back where we started, I suppose, talking about
yeah.
authentic purpose and agency.
I think so, yeah. I think that's the most important thing for us at ESB. It's our whole ethos really is about learner-centered talk and them driving whatever the conversation is. Because that's what gets the best out of them, and that's what we want is the best talk that they can do. And obviously it's slightly different in the classroom compared to like that final assessment model. But it is better than them not participating at all. And hopefully, once they start to participate, that breeds further participation. Participation, not precipitation. Participation. One final point on that actually about the authenticity before my 20 seconds runs up and my computer turns off, apparently. Remind them that it doesn't have to be perfect. Like any talk they do, perfection is not the key. Authenticity and meaning is the key to good talk.
Thank you, Lauren. What a wonderful place to bring things to a close. Thank
Right.
you. Thank you to you for sharing your time and expertise. Thank you, Lauren. And thank you to all of you for being here with us. The recording will be sent round to you tomorrow. So I'll send you off to your evenings. Thank you.